Before you press that vote button, before you choose who you believe can lead the country and bring about the change everyone is hoping for, I want you to stop for a moment. Have you ever stopped to think about what God really thinks about elections? About the leaders we put in power? About all this political competition that seems to define the destiny of all of us? I know it may sound strange, but perhaps the missing point of view is not in the headlines, nor in the heated debates, much less in the campaigns that paint everything in perfect colors. Maybe it's in the words God left us about what it means to be a real leader. Have you ever wondered why, at a certain point in history, God's people decided they wanted to be equal to other nations and have a king? The idea of being like everyone else sounded attractive, but what they didn't realize was that they were exchanging divine leadership for human, limited, and flawed leadership. This is how we begin to discuss how this constant search for an earthly leader, someone who can solve all our problems, is in fact a repetition of past mistakes. And that is exactly what we are experiencing today, an exaggerated dependence on leaders who are, deep down, as human as we are. In this video, I'm going to share something that will probably challenge what you believe about politics and faith. I'm going to open up the perspective that maybe we shouldn't put all our trust in figures like Trump or Kamala Harris, or any other name that comes along, promising a magical solution to a problem that is much bigger than any government can handle. Let's talk about God's role in leadership, about historical warnings, spiritual wars, and most importantly, about what the eternal kingdom of Christ really means. If you want to understand how this all connects, politics, faith, and our future, then you're in the right place. When talking about politics, many only think about debates, numbers, and promises. But there is a dimension that few consider. The spiritual warfare that is at play behind every decision, every word, every promise. It's no wonder that so many things seem to fall out of alignment during election times, as if suddenly the world entered a kind of synchronized chaos where truth becomes malleable and lies are disguised as hope. We cannot ignore that there is an invisible battle where forces beyond our understanding are at work, shaping what is fair and what is corrupt. Some may call this a conspiracy theory. But the truth is that, since the beginning of time, there has been a constant struggle between good and evil, and politics is one of the biggest battlegrounds in that war. Satan has always used systems of power to distort justice and promote oppression. This is visible from ancient empires to modern governments, whether in America or elsewhere. Who do you think really wins when leaders lose their souls for power? Corruption, greed, and pride are not just human failings. These are well-designed strategies to keep humanity away from the true path. And, as uncomfortable as it is to admit, every time we blindly support a leader without questioning their values, we are often aligning ourselves with something much darker than we can imagine. Think about how polarizing figures like Trump or Kamala Harris are. No matter which side you are on, polarization alone is a sign that spiritual forces are trying to divide, manipulate, and conquer. The truth is that behind every major political decision, there are influences that we are not always able to perceive. I'm not saying that Trump or Kamala Harris are puppets in the hands of evil, but it is undeniable that power has a way of corrupting even the most well-intentioned. The Apostle Paul already warned us about this. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. In other words, the real battle is not in the debates or at the ballot box, but in the intentions, in the spirits that shape these intentions. It's scary, I know, but it's also a call to open our eyes and understand that our responsibility goes far beyond voting. Our struggle, as citizens and as spiritual beings, is to realize where these influences are and how we can protect ourselves from them. And how do we do this? It's not just a matter of taking to the streets to protest or shouting louder. We are talking about an active, spiritual posture, of praying, of discerning, of not blindly accepting everything that is presented to us. In times of elections, it is easy to get carried away by the brilliant campaigns, the promises of change, the words carefully chosen to move us. But we need to remember that beyond the visible, there is a war going on. A war that is not won with votes, but with discernment, wisdom, and an unshakable trust in something greater. And this war is heading towards something even more alarming, something that the prophecies have already warned us about, a movement towards centralized power and absolute control. If there is one thing that is evident from the biblical stories, it is that trust in human leaders has always resulted in disappointment and loss, while trust in God has led to true freedom. We are not saying here that earthly leadership has no value, but the problem arises when we place absolute faith in it. See, how many times do we get frustrated expecting from fallible people what only something divine can provide? The people of Israel saw this in practice. When they trusted in kings, they also experienced oppression and deviation. And today, the story is not much different. We blindly trust rulers, expecting them to solve our problems, as if they were superheroes, while we forget that they are human, with their own agendas and limitations that go far beyond what electoral advertisements let on. It seems like we are constantly looking for someone to save us. Look at the elections in the United States, and this is exactly what we see: an almost messianic battle between candidates, as if the fate of the world depended solely on who will occupy the Oval Office. But it's not a question of Trump, Kamala Harris, or any other name. These leaders are just reflections of a society that prefers to follow people instead of trusting in what is not tangible, but which, paradoxically, is the most reliable of all. God is not subject to the limitations of politics, and that makes all the difference. Divine leadership is not concerned with popularity or re-election. It is eternal and is always in the best interests of its people. It's interesting to think about how true trust doesn't depend on physical evidence. God never needed an electoral campaign to be accepted as a leader. His authority came from the very essence of his presence and care. While human leaders are always promising something they can barely deliver, like prosperity or security, God offers us something that goes far beyond: peace in the midst of the storm and purpose in the midst of chaos. Many look to political figures, expect promises of national security, miraculous economic plans, and don't realize that true security and peace come from a source that no government can touch. Thus, trusting in God is much more than a spiritual gesture. It is an act of resistance against a system that always seeks to control us and shape us according to its needs and agendas. By placing our trust in the eternal, we are declaring that we will not be mere pawns in a political game, that we will not place our hopes on empty promises. This prepares us to see beyond what meets the eye, because behind the political figures, there is a much bigger battle going on. But to understand this, we need to take a closer look at the real war at stake, the one that you don't see in the headlines, but that influences every decision. God has always viewed leadership in a different way than we humans tend to desire. While the people of Israel cried out for a king, someone who would lead them as the other nations had, this desire symbolized more than a simple need for government. It was the exchange of the divine for the human, an attempt to fit in, to imitate the world around. They wanted tangible security, a face to represent their power. But in essence, they were abandoning the direct guidance of God, who had always been there, guiding them with his unparalleled wisdom. It's interesting how, even today, we continue to look to figures who seem powerful, like Trump or Kamala Harris, as if we depend exclusively on these leaders for our salvation. See, this is not just Israel's mistake. All of us at some point choose to depend on what is visible, tangible. We want to see a leader in front of us, with ready answers and an image of power that can calm us down. But the truth, which few like to admit, is that behind this facade of power, there are always human failures. And it's no different when we look at the current American electoral race. Many see candidates like Trump or Kamala Harris as the answer to all their problems. But are they really the solution? Or are we again trying to replace what is divine with something that, deep down, is only human and fallible? It's curious how history repeats itself. The people of Israel had Samuel, a prophet who constantly tried to remind them of divine leadership and what they were missing by opting for a human king. He knew the consequences, and yet the desire to have a king like the other nations prevailed. Not very different from what happens today, when we continue to place our hopes in political figures, hoping that they represent our redemption. God never needed a crown on his head to lead, while today we put all our chips on electoral campaigns, on the promise of change. But perhaps real change does not depend so much on who is in power, but rather on how we see the role of that leadership in our lives. And here comes the question. Isn't the search for a human leader an excuse to escape our responsibility? It's easy to point the finger and say that it's the government that fails, that it's the leaders who betray us. But what about us as individuals? What is our role in all of this? It is more comfortable to believe that divine leadership is useless because we cannot see it, we cannot touch it. However, God's true leadership never needed to be physical, and yet it was always there, like a small but firm voice. Maybe, instead of just rooting for whoever will win the next election, be it Trump, Kamala Harris, or anyone else, we should think about how to reconnect with something bigger, something that goes beyond the visible and the tangible. Samuel, the prophet, did not hesitate to warn the people of Israel about the consequences of choosing a human king. He was clear. A king would take the best young men, commandeer the best crops, and the people would end up serving the interests of the crown, not the other way around. It was a warning that echoed a truth that many prefer to ignore. All human power comes with a price. And here we are, centuries later, repeating the same mistakes, trusting too much in political figures who, deep down, only follow their own interests. Look at modern examples. In each election, promises are made and repeated, but real change rarely comes, as the priority is almost always the maintenance of power and not the well-being of the people. And just as Samuel warned Israel, perhaps it is our role to also reflect on the choices we make when we allow ourselves to be carried away by campaign rhetoric. In times of American elections, with names like Trump and Kamala Harris dominating the news, it's easy to forget that they, deep down, are human, susceptible to the same mistakes and failures as any of us. We must remember that, behind all the grandeur of the campaigns, there are decisions being made that could, eventually, cost us our freedoms. After all, when we place our trust blindly in human leaders, we end up giving up parts of our own autonomy. Interestingly, Samuel's warnings weren't just about crop failure or servitude. They symbolized the loss of something greater, the freedom to depend on God, on his pure guidance, and without ulterior motives. When a human king becomes the center of our faith, we inevitably pay a price. Nowadays, people complain about bureaucracy, high taxes, and rights that seem to be increasingly restricted. And no matter how much we deceive ourselves into thinking that a new president or a new government will solve all of this, the truth is that the nature of human power will always be limited and often self-destructive. It's time to reevaluate who or what we place our hope in. Are we repeating the same mistakes of the past, waiting for a leader or a government to offer us something that can only be found in faith in something greater? As we look at the American elections, it's not just about choosing between Trump or Kamala Harris. It's about understanding that regardless of who is in charge, historical warnings still resonate. They remind us that relying too much on human leaders is an age-old trap, and ultimately only one type of leadership truly sets us free. This reflection, of course, prepares us to discuss something even deeper. Where is our true confidence? Do you feel like we are living in challenging times but still can't fully understand what is happening around us? So that you can understand more clearly and quickly the signs that surround us, it is essential to be aware of the prophecies that are being fulfilled in our days. Many still don't realize the magnitude of what is happening in the world, and that's exactly why I decided to offer something special to all channel subscribers. An exclusive digital ebook titled The Secret Behind the Holy Bible. This book is an unmissable opportunity to access impactful revelations about biblical prophecies, which will open your eyes to current reality. Don't let this unique chance pass you by. The knowledge contained in this ebook can transform the way you see events around you, offering a new perspective on global events that have a direct connection with what was prophesied millennia ago. And best of all, the process to obtain your gift is quick and simple. Just click on the link available in the first pinned comment to immediately download the ebook. There is a global trend unfolding before our eyes, and few seem to truly realize the magnitude of it. Power systems are increasingly centralized, borders between countries seem less defined, and decisions that affect millions are made in closed rooms by a few people. This move toward centralized control is not just a fluke. If we look at biblical prophecies, it is clear that we are heading toward a scenario that has long been predicted, the rise of a single authoritarian power that will seek to control the entire world. It may seem like an exaggeration, but the signs are there. You just need to have eyes to see and the courage to accept what is happening. There is growing concern about the concentration of power in a few, with political and business figures taking on an almost omnipotent role in our lives. See what has happened with the influence of people like Elon Musk, who controls technologies that directly impact how we communicate, move, and even how we think about the future. And, in the political sphere, names like Trump and Kamala Harris are not just party leaders. They have become symbols, almost icons of a battle for power that goes beyond the boundaries of politics and enters the field of spiritual control. What we are seeing is the construction of a scenario where, one day, a leader will emerge, promising everything that humanity has always sought: peace, security, prosperity. But beneath that promise will lie deception, and that is where the danger really lies. The Antichrist's agenda is not something that will happen overnight. It is being built little by little, through each decision that limits our freedom, through each new technology that monitors our steps, and through each time we allow our voice to be silenced in the name of a greater good. This all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Think about social networks, data control, the way information is manipulated. We are slowly being conditioned to accept control and give up our freedoms as long as it offers us some security. And it is exactly this exchange that biblical prophecies warn about. A time when we will be so desperate for stability that we will hand over our autonomy to a leader who, in essence, represents the opposite of everything that is fair and true. Looking at political and social trends, it is not difficult to see how this scenario is being set. It's not just about Trump or Kamala Harris, nor about who will win the next election. It's about a profound change in the way humanity organizes itself and how we are led to think that the solution to all our problems lies in more control, more surveillance, more concentrated power. But aren't we heading exactly towards the scenario that the book of Revelation describes? The question that remains is, are we ready to resist this? Because believe me, when the Antichrist emerges, it will not be with a scary face. He will come as someone who will bring all the answers the world wants. And it is at this point that we need to be alert, understanding that true peace and security do not come from a system of control, but from something much greater, something eternal and incorruptible. After so much talk about the rise of dark powers, it is essential to bring a perspective of hope that has never been defeated, that has remained firm since the beginning of time. Because in the end, we know that chaos and oppression will not have the final say. There is something greater than all political systems, than all the leaders who have ever existed or will ever exist. I speak of the eternal kingdom of Christ, a kingdom that is not based on military power, wealth, or any kind of earthly control, but on justice, peace, and true love. This is the type of leadership that does not seek submission through fear, but rather an internal transformation, which begins in each heart. It is important to understand that the kingdom of Christ looks nothing like what we are used to seeing in our political leaders. He doesn't depend on electoral campaigns, he doesn't make empty promises to gain support, and he doesn't play with people's hopes. When Christ spoke about his kingdom, he made it clear that it was not of this world and that in itself changes everything. While leaders like Trump, Kamala Harris or any other figure strive to gain power, Christ offers us something that is already prepared, a place where there is no more suffering, no more pain, no more injustices that so often revolt us. This kingdom is not about control, but about true freedom. Imagine a world where justice truly prevails, where peace is not just a promise in speeches, but a daily reality. Christ assures us that this kingdom will come, and that is what we cling to when all seems lost. Because, while the world runs after immediate solutions, leaders who promise to solve complex problems with simplistic measures, the kingdom of Christ goes beyond all that. It is a kingdom that not only appeases the external, but transforms the internal, that heals the wounds of the soul, that restores relationships and brings true reconciliation. It is not something that any earthly government can offer, no matter how well-intentioned. And it is this kingdom that gives us the strength to continue. When we look at the current situation, the power struggle, the corruption, the hidden agendas, we can feel helpless, as if we are at the mercy of forces greater than ourselves. But the kingdom of Christ reminds us that true power is not in the hands of those in high positions, but in the hands of the one who created everything. And in the end, no matter how strong the system that stands up, it will fall before the glory of the one who is just. The certainty of Christ's eternal kingdom is what allows us to look at the struggles and challenges of the present without fear, knowing that there is something infinitely greater that awaits us. And so we continue, not just waiting, but now living the values of this kingdom while we await its full fulfillment. Now that we have reached the end of this journey of reflection on leadership, power, and true authority, I need to ask you, how do you intend to apply all this knowledge? Everything we discuss here is not just about theory. It's not about knowing a little more about history, or about debating politics as a pastime. We are talking about the real impact on your life, your choices, your faith. The real question is, are you willing to change the way you view those in power? Are you ready to place your trust in something that goes beyond the visible, the earthly, the flawed? The truth is that we need more than ever to stop looking for redemption in human leaders and reconnect with the one who can really change our history. God never wanted us to depend on kings, rulers, or people who barely know our names and yet determine the course of our lives. True leadership, the kind that transforms us from the inside out, comes from a very different place. It comes from the kingdom of Christ. The invitation here is not just to reflect, but to act, to decide today in whom you place your hope. What's more, I challenge you. How about starting to think about your role in this society in a different way? Not as someone who waits for others to solve everything, but as someone who seeks discernment, who prays, who is attentive to what really matters. The world is full of empty promises, but true hope never disappoints. If you are ready to dive deeper into this subject and continue learning about how to apply all of this in practice, subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications, because we cannot afford to be indifferent at such a crucial moment in history. With each video, with each study, we have the opportunity to prepare ourselves for what really matters. Don't forget to download our book, The Secret Behind Biblical Prophecies. There are already more than 500,000 copies sold, and we are at the last units, so don't waste time and enjoy. I guarantee that you will acquire a lot of knowledge after reading this sensational book, written with great care and love for all the subscribers of our channel, completely based on the Holy Bible. The link is in the first pinned comment.